Another of CaPRI's initiatives to discuss important topics informally and formally, as we do. As is our custom in Jamaica, we ask the Lord to bless the occasion. Heavenly Father, we ask thy blessing on the occasion. Thank you. We have some very special people here tonight, and I'm told in the world of protocol, we ought to say first, got it all wrong, but anyway, first, honorable ministers, honored guests, members of the opposition, critical members of the sector, and for CaPRI, the most important group, donors or potential donors. We want to say welcome, and we look at you and we say thank you for coming, and thank you for thanking you either for investing in CaPRI or planning to invest in CaPRI. We are going to get some fulsome introductions of our honored guests who are very distinguished. And I will only say that they can say, been there, done that. And so when they come to talk to us, they will be able to talk to us from the depth of experience. The lone female at the head table is from the World Bank. And this is Ms. François Clark, Director of Caribbean Regional World Bank. Welcome. Beside her is a well-known Jamaican, Mr. Giorgio Valentini. We have adopted him, and he's now one of us, and he really needs no introduction. But he is the representative for Jamaica, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago. And I feel sorry for those other countries because he's only here. So they welcome, sir. I will save the important people for the last. Beside them, we have Chris Tofton, who is one of the co-directors of CaPRI, and is in that capacity here tonight, Senator, of course. And we also welcome Dr. Damien King, who is a distinguished scholar and head of the Department of Economics, but most importantly, he's a co-director of CaPRI. Welcome, David. But my name is Marshall Hall, and I am retired.
First head of Management Studies Department.
First head of Management Department, and that was one of my students. And I take no credit. But I do take praise. Special guest tonight. We have, first of all, the Honorable Pierre Laporte. Honorable Pierre Laporte started his education in Seychelles and continued in the United Kingdom, where he obtained a bachelor's degree in business economics with computing with honors at the Surrey University and a master's degree in economics with distinction at the Sheffield University. He started his career with the Central Bank of Seychelles and moved on to occupy various senior positions. The latter Director General for Research and Statistics, a position he occupied until February 2002, when he was appointed as an economist with the International Monetary Fund at its headquarters in Washington, D.C. Mr. Laporte later served as an IMF resident in West Africa during 2005 to 2009. In November 2008, he was appointed Governor of the Central Bank in the Seychelles, and in March 2012, Mr. Laporte became Minister for Finance, Trade and Investment. Welcome, sir. To his right is Mr. Ali Michael. Have I got it right, sir? Or Michael?
Don't usually use it.
Don't usually use it. Well, I will. Mr. Ali Mansour, Financial Secretary, Minister of Finance and Economic Development in Mauritius. Mr. Mansour has been Financial Secretary at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development in Mauritius since 2006. He was an economist at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. from 1982 to 1988, and a public finance and trade economist at the World Bank, also in Washington, from 88 to 92. He also worked for the European Commission from 92 to 95, and then became country economist for Madagascar for the World Bank from 95 to 97. He also served as executive secretary of the Camisa Clearinghouse, Harare, Zimbabwe, from 19 1997 to 1999. From 2003 to 2006, he was the lead economist at the World Bank's Economist Office for Europe. So thank you, sir, and welcome. Thank you all.
Good evening to you all, and welcome, reinforcing what our chairman of CaPRI, Dr. Marshall Hall has said. We're happy to have you. I am here to tease a little and to hopefully create the context for what I think is or will be a stimulating discussion. To those who are here in Jamaica for a long time, that means excluding our specially invited guests, I want you to work with me a little bit. Imagine Jamaica, a former British colony, gaining independence in 1968. Not 1962, 1968. Remember now, imagine. Economically and socially, let's explore a bit. Lower income developing country, monocrop representing 91% of export earnings. That of course is sugarcane. Unemployment over 16%. Life expectancy 64 years. Per capita income US $200. That's 1968. Fast forward to the year 2012. Per capita GDP, depending on how you look at it, over 10,000 US dollars. Unemployment under 8%. Life expectancy over 70 years. Poverty less than double digits. Growth rate, despite a global recession, which we have all had to confront, 4 to 5% per annum. Over 30,000 companies, offshore companies registered, primarily representing countries like China, India, and South Africa. Further imagine the world viewing this small economy of 1.3 million people from an investment perspective. And I'm referring now to the various indexes that are done each year to determine the attractiveness of an economy over the period 2011-2012. Global Competitiveness Index, first in Sub-Saharan Africa. Index of Economic Freedom, first in Sub-Saharan Africa. Doing Business Index, #1 in Sub-Saharan Africa. Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Report, first in Sub-Saharan Africa. Network Readiness Index, first or #1. Paying taxes, #1 in that region. And I deliberately asked the current and former Minister of Finance to sit together because I believe they can relate to a lot of what we're about to say. A number of issues being discussed. Imagine again, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Flat tax, 15%. Removal of discretionary waivers, Minister and former Minister. From the Minister of Finance, from customs and excise duties. Broadening the tax base to make it more equitable. Tax administration strategy, debt management strategy, environmental sustainability, renewable energy thrust like solar and wind, labor market reform to allow employers to, or should I put it this way, that the FS put it I think a unique way which we can adopt. He says labor market reform to allow workers to more freely move from one employer to the next. If you talk to from another perspective, it is labor market reform to be able to hire and fire, right? And I could go on. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine Mauritius. And that's what I am sure we will expand on later on from the Financial Secretary, who we welcomed here earlier. Even more challenging, imagine independence in 1976. That's much closer. An economy, again, lower income, primarily fishing and farming. And the crops include my favorite, cassava, but also vanilla, cinnamon, coconuts. Fast forward to 2008, food and oil price shock, which I believe we can relate to again. But what we can't relate to, Minister and former Minister of Finance, is actually a default in 2008 on a US 80 million euro bond, which led to a downgrade of an economy and the need for IMF intervention. Can we relate to that? Not the downgrade, but the IMF intervention, which brought with it,
Don't repeat any idea.
I'm just giving the facts, significant conditionalities, including, of course, cutting spending, floating the exchange rate, tax reform, deregulating communications and finance sectors. Move further to 2012. Growth, a default in 2008, but growth of 5% by 2012. Unemployment approximately 2%. Inflation 2.7%. Tourism industry, which represents 30% of the labor force, 70% of the hard currency, former Minister of Tourism. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine this Seychelles. That's the context in which we are here today and why we have invited the Honorable Minister to share with us. CaPRI does not advocate a one-size-fits-all policy. That's not what we're here for. We're not saying that what has happened in those countries automatically fits our own circumstances and context. But we do conclude that there are lessons to be learned. We thank the World Bank for collaborating with us and encourage you to participate and take away from these discussions here, if not a specific prescription, the courage to pursue what is right and in the best interest of the country. Thank you very much. That is the context.
We're now going to move into to hear from our honored guests, and we're first going to ask Mr. Laporte.
Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Minister of Finance, former Minister. I want to first thank the World Bank and the other organizers of the event for having invited me to be here. It's really a privilege and an honor for me. And as our colleague has said here, the intention here is not really to come and tell you that everything is perfect in Seychelles, that you haven't done right things. Yesterday, Professor Reed made one very good point, that despite the fact that today the Caribbean islands as a group faces serious challenges in deciding, where you are, where do you go, how do you deal with your growth challenges. Not to forget that the Caribbean going backwards has been one of the success stories in terms of growth. However, now you are at a crossroads, and as you struggle to get the right strategy to grow. Just to put things a little bit in perspective, between Seychelles and Mauritius, we are a tiny island of 90,000 people, per capita of about 14,000 USD, slightly higher than Mauritius. Number 2 in most of the rankings that was said by the gentleman here. But in certain areas like Human Development Index, Seychelles is ranked first in Africa. So we are not very much different from Mauritius. I think, to be honest, we've looked at Mauritius as an example to follow, and we are not shy to say that. And what am I here? I want to say tonight is hopefully that the lessons that we have learned in Seychelles will help you to some extent to try and think how you can use some of the lessons to your benefit. Basically, Seychelles in 2008, we also stood at a crossroads. We faced a situation whereby the country was suffering from severe macroeconomic imbalances, severe structural constraints that had resulted from many years of centrally planned economy. And when the political situation opened up in 1991, after many years of single-party state, I see this as a critical point because up to between independence in 76 and 1991, we had a multi-party system, and we obtained a lot of financial support from we were a socialist country then, from Russia, free doctors from Cuba, free teachers from many other places. But when the situation changed in the early 90s, the Berlin Wall collapsed and Seychelles was no longer receiving aid as it used to. That was a time when the country should have adjusted. But instead what unfortunately happened is in order to maintain the welfare standard that existed then, the authorities decided to monetize deficits, run deficits to keep the country going. I'm surprised that it went so long. And by 1998, we faced a situation of everything was fixed. The exchange rate was fixed, prices were fixed. There were exchange controls. We had run out virtually of external reserves. And in mid of 2008, the country could not afford to pay one installment on a huge, well, it's not $80 million, it was a $300 million Euro bond, which at the time I was with the IMF, but when I came at the start of the reforms, I was surprised to see that the bond that had been raised a few months earlier had been rated something like B+ by Standard & Poor's for a country that had no reserves. I wonder why they thought we were going to find the money to pay the bond. So the country had no choice but to default. And in answering one question this afternoon, I'm by no means advocating that anybody should default. I think in the case of Seychelles, what happened is we defaulted by virtue of basically not having any money to pay. I remember in those times we had ships waiting to unload fuel, and the country didn't have money. It was that bad, believe me, it was that bad in 2008. So there came the debt crisis. At the same time, the world economy was entering the Great Recession. And conveniently for the president and his team, we called in the IMF, with the support of the World Bank and other donors, started to devise a program that would help address the BOP crisis at the time. So the first step was the program had, I would say, 4 critical elements. The first step was to liberalize the financial system, the monetary system, float the exchange rate, remove all exchange controls. Secondly, implement a very tight fiscal policy, which would be followed later by structural reforms in the tax administration and budgetary frameworks, public finance management. The third pillar was other structural reforms, which immediately took place. We eliminated all universal subsidies on fuel, public transport. All subsidies to parastatals at the time were just cut off. Very drastic reforms, and this was then, once the program was in place, we had to address the debt issue. So we went to the Paris Club in early 2009, and we fought very hard. Eventually we obtained a 45% haircut on Paris Club debt. And as a condition for that, we had also to apply the same measure of haircut to the bondholders and other private creditors, as well as non-Paris Club bilaterals. It took us about 2 years to go through this process, very long and hard, but eventually we managed to get everyone, including the bondholders, to accept the haircut. And as a result, our debt to GDP ratio from 130% of GDP in 2008 has now passed to 75% of GDP. And we expect to reach the 50% threshold by 2018, 6 years from now. And we are confident that if we are able to maintain the policies that we do now, we will get there, because since 2008 we've successfully, year after year, managed to run primary fiscal surpluses. In 2009 we hit a record 14% of GDP, which was the highest in any non-oil producing country. In 2010 it was about 7, and in the last year was 4.5, and we expect to, we had hoped, Minister, as you said yesterday, to run as we go forward, to run a lower primary surplus. But the latest projection we have is we have to at least maintain the 4.5 until then, because today as we face the challenge of the recession in Europe, which is our main tourism market. This year we have revised growth downwards to nearer to 3% from 4% earlier. So as your growth declines, you have to have more effort to attain your debt to GDP ratio. And essentially, one thing I forgot in terms of the structural measure, we also implemented a redundancy of 15% of the labor force. So these were very, very tough measures. And as of today, we continue. Because of the good thing is the reforms, the results were achieved much faster. Like the exchange rate, after overshooting from 12 to $1 to 18 in the first few months, it quickly turned back down to 12 within a matter of 6 months. And inflation, which shot up from 30% when we floated to 60% in the months that followed, we were able to bring down inflation to close to 2%, which has been close to 0 in the last few years. This year, unfortunately, inflation has been creeping up because of the depreciation of the exchange rate, higher food and fuel prices. But basically, we continue to maintain the program with the IMF that we have now. Well, I always call it in Seychelles. I remind people it's a Seychelles reform program supported by the IMF and the World Bank. So we expect to complete the EFF, which was the second program under the reform, by the end of the year. And the question going forward now is, do we have another program, or do we go on our own? I think to me, the benefits of having the Bretton Woods institutions and the likes of the EU and the African Development Bank has been more in capacity building, because as these teams come to Seychelles Exchange, I've seen how much our young staff in the bank, in the Ministry of Finance, have been able to build capacity internally. But one thing I always tell everybody I speak to in Seychelles when they ask, what are you going to do after the end of the program? I tell them it doesn't matter if we have the IMF or not. What matters is to have the right policies and to maintain that policy going forward. So what I want to sort of convey here tonight is it's always very, very difficult to do this kind of efforts and austerity measures, I would put it that way. But in the case of Seychelles, which you will see later, is slightly different from Mauritius, because our situation was much worse. So we had to do more than the Mauritians did, or at a faster rate and more painful. But at the end of the day, we had no choice. And one of the lessons I've learned myself is the longer we waited to do these reforms, the more hurtful it was in the end. Because I remember back in the mid-90s, when I just came back from university, after the problems of the early 90s started to creep up with the monetization of the deficits. I remember when the IMF came then in 1994, they estimated the parallel market rate, the exchange rate. Official rate was about 5, the parallel market was about 6.5. And 18 years later, the premium was 300%. So the longer we waited, the more it hurt us. And again, when I left the bank to go to the IMF as a staff in 2002, I remember the external debt was about $150, $200 million. When I came back in 2008, it was $850 million. So what Seychelles tried to do in those times, they tried to borrow into solving the problem. I remember we started with a $20 million Citibank bond. We took another one from another bank to pay it off. The next one was $150 to pay off the $100 million one. The next one was a $300 million bond to pay off the $150, and in the end, we just lost our way. So my message is, it's painful, but at the end of the day, the longer we wait, the harsher it is. And maybe just one last anecdote. Before we floated, the per capita GDP in US dollars was about 12,000. After we did the reforms, the devaluation, everything, we were looking at the per capita income in 2009